Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're venturing deep into the unforgiving, rugged landscape near the Dead Sea. Why? Well, we're going to uncover an incredible true crime drama hidden right inside one of history's absolute greatest archaeological discoveries. We're going to look past all the popular myths and piece together the real gritty story of the mysterious Qumran Brotherhood and the explosive texts they left behind.
It's kind of a fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, picture this. If you were going to isolate yourself in a remote desert cave system to prepare for the literal end of the world, what books are you taking with you? We are about to uncover the astonishing contents of a hidden ancient library, a library that was lost to the sands of time for centuries, only to be stumbled upon completely by accident.
Okay, let's dive into this. You might expect a hardcore group like this to just stick to the standard biblical texts, right? But take a look at their actual reading list. Sure, they had the Torah, the prophets, and a beautifully preserved scroll of Isaiah, but they definitely didn't stop there. They heavily favored apocalyptic texts and things we'd now call rejected or hidden, the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. They were just obsessed with books like the Book of Enoch, which talks all about angelic rebellions, the Book of Jubilees, and the Genesis Apocryphon. To this sect, these weren't just obscure little myths. This was the foundational, absolute truth of their entire universe.
Now, as you can see here, these fragmented, incredibly delicate texts survive today only because of pure, unbelievable accident. Just imagine being a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Adib. You're wandering the rocky cliffs near the Dead Sea, just looking for a lost goat. You toss a stone into a dark cave opening, hoping to scare the goat out. But instead, smash. You hear the unmistakable sound of shattering pottery. What he found inside were these tall clay jars, and sealed within them were scrolls wrapped up in linen, perfectly preserved for 2,000 years.
And among those fragments was something nobody expected to find, a text called the Prayer of Nabonidus. What's absolutely incredible here is the story it actually tells. It describes this great king of Babylon, Nabonidus, who is struck with a severe, agonizing ulcer by the command of God. He suffers for 7 whole years in the city of Timah, until a Jewish prophet finally steps in. If you know your history, this directly mirrors the famous stories of King Nebuchadnezzar from the book of Daniel. It really shows us how these ancient stories circulated, evolved, and were deeply, deeply studied by this secluded group.
Act 2. The Desert Brotherhood. Let's shift gears from what they read to who these people actually were. An intense, highly regimented sect living out in the Qumran caves. So, who exactly were the men reading these scrolls? Well, they were completely cut off from the rest of society, and joining this brotherhood, it wasn't exactly like joining a modern book club. It was a grueling, life-altering commitment. First, you faced a super strict examination of your character. Then, you entered a mandatory 2-year probation period where you were constantly being tested. If you somehow passed all that, you had to surrender absolutely all of your personal property and wealth to the community's inspector. Imagine having to give up your entire bank account just to join a community. This wasn't just voluntary sharing like we see in early Christianity. This was a mandatory, irrevocable transfer of everything you owned. Finally, you swore a terrifying oath of absolute secrecy.
And those oaths? They were quite literally a matter of life and death, because members swore they would never, ever partake in the food or customs of outsiders. Getting expelled from the group was essentially a death sentence. Think about it. If you committed a grave sin and got cast out, your strict vows still bound you. You couldn't accept food from anyone outside the sect. The ancient records actually tell us that, out of pure desperation, expelled members were forced to eat grass. Their bodies would just waste away until they starved, unless the community took pity on them at the very last second. No way, right?
Inside the community, the discipline was just as extreme. They didn't just sit around a campfire chatting casually. No, they had specific camps managed by an inspector, a mabakir. During their meetings, there was a rigid hierarchy. Priests sat first, then the elders, then the rest of the people, all strictly by rank. They had this council of the masses that maintained absolute silent order. You never spoke out of turn, and you absolutely never interrupted another member while they were speaking. It was an environment of total, unyielding control.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it brings us to Act 3, an ancient rivalry. This is really the climax of the explainer.
Because beneath the mundane copying of ancient texts and the super strict rules, these scrolls actually hide a juicy, ancient political thriller. We're talking a high-stakes rivalry that completely tore their world apart.
The texts constantly reference two enigmatic, unnamed figures, using these specific symbolic titles. On one side, we have the teacher of righteousness. He's described as this humble, enlightened guy, the persecuted leader of the sect who claimed God had revealed all hidden mysteries to him. On the exact opposite side stands his arch-nemesis, the wicked priest. The texts describe this man as a corrupt, greedy ruler who betrayed God's covenant for wealth, stole from the poor, and built a city on blood. It's basically a massive historical true crime expose written in real time by the victims.
We actually get to see the climax of this rivalry in the commentary text shown here, the Habakkuk commentary. It details a truly terrifying moment where the wicked priest actually storms the teacher's private desert retreat. And get this, he does it on the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year. The wicked priest just shows up in full terrifying authority, trying to confuse them, torment them, and make them stumble right on their sacred day of fasting. So the big question is, what actually happened to the teacher? And this brings up a massive, highly controversial debate among scholars. When these texts were first translated, some scholars, like Dupont Summer, looked at this suffering teacher of righteousness and theorized he was a direct prototype for Jesus. They argued that the text showed the teacher was tortured, crucified, and even expected to resurrect decades before Christianity even existed. As you can imagine, this theory sent absolute shockwaves through the historical and religious communities. But actually, scratch that. Let's look at what the texts really say. The verdict from the overwhelming majority of historians and linguists today is clear. There is actually zero evidence of crucifixion for the teacher in the scrolls. None at all. In fact, the texts seem to indicate the teacher of righteousness died a totally natural death. He was just gathered to his fathers. It was actually the wicked priest who met a terrible, agonizing, violent end. The scrolls state that God delivered the wicked priest into the hands of his enemies, striking him with a bitter, horrifying punishment for his sins.
So if the wicked priest was a real person who suffered a terrible fate, who was he? Well, historians have mapped out the clues to identify two prime ancient suspects who fit the profile perfectly. Suspect number one is Jonathan Maccabeus, around 160 BC. He started off righteous, but eventually gathered immense wealth, built huge armies, and was ultimately captured and killed by his enemies. Suspect number two is Alexander Jannaeus, around 103 BC. This guy was notoriously cruel. He persecuted religious factions without mercy, and he died an agonizing death from a severe fever that ravaged his body for 3 years. The clues in the scrolls map beautifully onto the bloody, chaotic politics of ancient Judea. Ultimately, the Dead Sea Scrolls aren't just dry, dusty religious manuscripts. Not at all. They are the surviving diaries of a deeply committed, highly disciplined brotherhood caught right in the crosshairs of a ruthless political world. They tell a very human story of faith, betrayal, survival, and a bitter rivalry between a humble teacher and a corrupt priest. So I'll leave you with this. Does finding this very real, high-stakes human conflict behind these ancient texts change how you view history? It definitely reminds us that behind every great historical artifact, there are real people who lived, fought, and died for what they believed in. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the past.